mother did anything wrong. They didn't do anything. They had no position of power. And yet God still chose Isaac instead. And I think, why in the world does God choose Jacob? Out of the two, Jacob and Esau, God chooses Jacob to use. And he chooses him early. He chooses him early, even when, in my opinion, Jacob is still the villain of the story. He even comes out grabbing his brother's heel. He comes out, and you know this kid's going to be a problem. You know that? Have you ever taught a Sunday school class or babysat kids, and they come in, and you're like, oh, I can tell right away you're going to be a problem. That was Jacob, right out of the womb. So they go on. And clearly there are issues between the brothers. In Genesis 25, this is what it says, starting in verse 29. Once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished. Jacob replied, first sell me your birthright. Look, I'm about to die, Esau said. What good is the birthright to me? But Jacob said, swear to me first. So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. So here's the deal. The firstborn son receives typically at least double what anybody else gets in terms of inheritance. So the firstborn son, his birthright is a double dose of what his father would give them as inheritance. We see that also even in the New Testament. When Jesus tells the prodigal son story, and the younger brother comes and says, give me what I'm going to inherit, and he gives it to him. And then later when he returns and his brother's all mad, and the dad is talking to the older brother, and he says to his older brother, everything I have is yours. Because the oldest receives everything I have that's left. Most everything he's got is going to the oldest. The youngest gets a little bit. So this is a big deal. And it's ridiculous because they're twins. I mean, it's just a matter of who came out first. But still, Esau came out first. He is the one that deserves the birthright according to the way that they live. And yet Jacob is conniving. He doesn't accept his position as second son. And he manipulates his brother. At the time that his brother is the most weak and is the most able to be, manipulated into giving up something so valuable, Jacob does it. It's wrong. It's mean-spirited. It's cheating. And there's no reason, according to the Bible, that Esau did anything. It doesn't say that Esau was a bad guy. It doesn't say that Esau deserved some kind of judgment, some kind of loss. But Jacob stole it anyway, and it just gets worse. It just gets worse, and you may know this part of the story. Jacob and his mother, as Isaac is aging, conspire to steal not only the birthright, but now Isaac's blessing. And the blessing is a big deal. A blessing, especially in those days, meant something. They believed spiritually it meant something, but it certainly meant that he was the one who would lead going forward. Now, there are some that would tell you blessing still means something, and I think it does. And we don't do enough blessing each other as in the name of God. I knew this guy who I know I've told some of you this story, but this guy who is a former executive minister in a region. And he was driving down the road and was probably not driving very fast. And the guys pulled up beside him and gave him that one finger to let him know that they weren't happy with him. You know which one I'm talking about? You probably do. They gave him that one, and somebody knows. He gave him that finger, and he looked over, and instead of doing something back or getting upset or whatever, he turned towards the car, and he did the sign of the cross, and he offered a blessing. And he really did. And he said, I prayed God's blessing on these young men that were flipping me off from the truck next to me. And he said the best part of it was the guy in the passenger seat turns to the driver and goes, you just flipped off a priest. And they took off driving down the road. And he used to say, blessing is real. We need to be blessing each other instead of cursing each other. So this is a big deal in their culture, but it's still a big deal. Blessing matters. And so here's what happens. Jacob and his mother, they conspire. Jacob's going to dress like his brother. He's going to put goat skins on his arms so he feels like his brother who's really hairy. And he's going to smell like his brother, and he's going to do everything that his father would want Esau to do. So while Esau is gone, Isaac, who's pretty well blind and can't see anything, Jacob comes to him. And this is what it says. Genesis 27, verse 22. Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau. So he proceeded to bless him. "Are you really my son, Esau?" he asked. "I am," he replied. Then he said, "My son, bring me some of your game to eat so that I may give you my blessing." Jesus brought it to him, and he ate, and he brought some wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come here, my son, and kiss me." So he went to him and kissed him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you heaven's dew and earth's riches, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed." After Isaac finished blessing him, and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, his brother Esau came in from hunting. He too prepared some tasty food and brought it to his father. Then he said to him, "My father, please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing." His father Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" "I'm your son," he answered, "your firstborn, Esau." Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." When Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, "Bless me too, my father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." Esau said, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? This is the second time he has taken advantage of me. He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing." Then he asked, "Haven't you reserved any blessing for me?" Isaac answered Esau, "I have made him lord over you, and have made all of his relatives his servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son?" Read the story. It almost is, it's painful to read. When you read it from the perspective of Esau, who is mistreated here, Jacob did something that was awful to his brother. He lied to his father. He stole from his brother. And to read Esau's reaction to that, to come in expecting to get what is rightfully his, and to find out that his brother had tricked his father. This can't be truly blessed by God. This isn't the method. We talk so much about it's not just what we do, but it's how we do it. Jesus cared about your motivations. He cared about why we did things and how we did things, and not just the action itself. And yet Jacob is deceiving his brother out of his blessing. Why would God choose this guy? I told you he's a villain. Well, there are other places we see. This is a long story. And we see other moments where Jacob is struggling against others. Jacob leaves because he knows that Esau is upset, and he better get out of there. So he goes and he finds some family, and he encounters Laban. In Genesis 29, 16 and 17, it says, "Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful." Isn't that the worst way to describe people? Leah had weak eyes. Basically, he was attracted to Rachel, Leah not so much. Okay? And so he sees these 2 women, and he goes to Laban. And Laban says, "If you'll work for me for 7 years, I will let you marry my daughter Rachel." So he does. He works for him for 7 years. He goes to marry Rachel, but on that night, finally somebody gets the better of Jacob. And Laban deceives him, and he switches his daughters, and he gives him Leah to marry instead. And he says later, when Jacob finds out and freaks out that that's not the girl he wanted to marry, Laban says, why would I marry my youngest instead of my oldest? That's not how we do things. But if you would like Rachel too, you can work for me another 7 years. And he did. He tricked Jacob into 7 years for the wrong wife and got another 7 years for the right one. And Jacob was angry, and it's kind of like he deserves it because he's been doing this to people his whole life. So Jacob does this thing where he begins to deceive again, and it's really kind of a weird thing to understand. He begins to build great wealth while keeping the flocks for Laban, but he does it by, like, he mates the sheep in front of some tree branches, and that leads to some of them being speckled and some of them not. Ultimately, it ends up with Jacob has all the good sheep, and Laban has all the weak sheep, to the point that Laban gets angry on the part of his deception and chases him down. What you see is Jacob continues to burn his bridges, right? So he deceives Laban. He builds great wealth. He takes off with his family. Laban chases him, tries to stop him because he's angry at the deception. Over and over again, Jacob is burning his bridges with others. Still not the man that you would think God would call, until one thing happened. Genesis chapter 32, starting in verse 24. Jacob is going home. He's made peace with Laban, and he's going back home, and that means going home means going where Esau's going to be. And we know for years Esau has hated his brother because of what he did. And Jacob is going to meet his brother, and he doesn't know what's going to happen. And it says this. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." It's a weird encounter. Jacob is getting ready to go and to see his brother. He has burned every bridge on the way here. He has done every deceitful, lying, wrong thing to get to the place he is. So he sends his family over, and he's like, "I'm going to go on ahead. I'm going to see if my brother's going to kill me. I don't know what's going to happen." And then there that night, a man comes to him. A man that changed him completely. See, Jacob wasn't yet the right person. He didn't have the right posture. He wasn't ready to do what God wanted him to do. So God comes and meets him. We don't know exactly what happened here. It depends on kind of how we read it and how we interpret it. It says a man several times throughout the passages. Verse 24, it says that a man came and struggled with him. In Hosea chapter 12, it says in the womb, talking about Jacob, it says, "In the womb he grasped his brother's heel. As a man he struggled with God. He struggled with the angel and overcame him. He wept and begged for his favor. He found him at Bethel and talked with him there." So it says that he struggled with an angel representing God. But in the verses themselves, in 28 and 30, it says, "Then the man said, 'Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you've struggled with God and with humans and have overcome.'" And 30, Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." So God meets Jacob in this place, and they have a wrestling match. It seems like an odd thing for God to choose to do. But they do, and as they do, God can't defeat Jacob. Notice that? They're wrestling, and God isn't winning. He should be winning, right? I mean, our basic theology is that God is all powerful. But God comes and meets with Jacob, and in this wrestling match, Jacob wins. He gets to the point where he has a hold on this God, this man, this angel, this representative of God that's there. He has a hold on him that he can't get out of, and he says, "Until you bless me, I'm not letting you go." And God does. I think there's two things Jacob needed in this meeting. One, he needed to receive a blessing not from another person that was manipulated or stolen or gotten in the wrong way. He needed a blessing from God. He needed to receive that. And he needed to get it fair and square, legitimately. So as he does that, as he wrestles with God, God blesses him because he won. The other thing Jacob needed was to be humbled. You know, beating God comes at a price. God allows Jacob, for whatever reason, to go through this and to win this wrestling match, but it comes at a price because God touches his hip, and for the rest of his life, his hip is affected. A dose of humility that changed his posture towards other people, towards his brother. After this encounter, we see the Jacob that we can say knew God. It's after this encounter, we see the Jacob that we can say was the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. He's the one that we can go back to and say, yes, this is a man of God. Not before, but after. As he goes on, Jacob goes and he meets his brother, and he bows before him. Imagine the one who stole his blessing and his birthright. He bows before him. He comes humbly before him, a changed person, a completely different guy, because of an encounter he had in a wrestling match with God. We learn in this story that God continues to be faithful, but he's also patient. He gave Jacob decades to figure it out. Jacob, though he wasn't doing the right things, God still called him, God still planned for him, and God came and met him so that he could then be used to be who God wants him to be. Reality is sometimes we aren't yet the people that God wants us to be either. But God is still calling us. He's still working through us. He doesn't run out of patience for us to be able to encounter him and switch, change, become who he wants us to be. But we've got to stop wrestling. We've got to stop fighting for things. We've got to stop deceiving to get there. We've got to stop worrying about trying to figure out our own plan to get where we want to go, and instead let God's plans take priority over ours. His plans are better, they're fuller, and they're richer. Maybe not in the ways you think, but in the ways that matter. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for the story of Jacob. This guy who did so much wrong, who treated people wrong, who cheated people, who manipulated. Lord, I thank you for the story because it reminds us that you are patient and you are faithful when you've called us. Lord, I also thank you for this encounter that changed his life. Because you've offered to come and encounter us too. That through Jesus and through your Holy Spirit, we have an opportunity to experience change in our lives. That we can flip around, that we can become a different person through meeting you, just as Jacob did. Lord, I thank you for that reminder, and I pray that you would help us to look for you, to come and to be with us, to show us where you want us to go and who you want us to be. We praise you for the stories in our history that remind us of the God who loves us, who is patient with us, and who's faithful. We thank you for Jesus, who now ultimately lets us know you and experience your presence in our lives. We pray these things in His name. As we close, we're going to sing one more song, and as we do, this is our opportunity to respond. So if God is at work in you and you need to do something about that, feel free to come forward as we sing. Let's stand and sing together.
My faith looks up to Thee, Thou Lamb of Calvary, Savior divine. Now hear me while I pray. Take all my guilt away. Oh, let me from this day be only Thine. May Thy rich grace impart strength to my fainting heart. My zeal inspire, as Thou hast died for me. Oh, may my love to Thee, pure, warm, and changeless be, the living fire.
Let's pray. Lord, as we go out from here, we pray that you would go with us. Lord, help us be the people you've created us to be. Lord, help us to experience your presence in our lives and be changed by it just as Jacob was. Lord, go with us in Jesus.